So yes, hello everyone. Welcome to this session on long-term visions for climate, biodiversity, and the potential role of EbA. So I'll today moderate this session. My name is Ulrich Kindermann, and I would like to introduce our speakers of today's sessions. So we have Carolina Oseche from Colombia, who will present the Colombian experience with developing a long-term strategy. And then we have already in the call Rosa Kyrgyzbekova from the GIZ program to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement, who will give an input on the need for integrated long-term strategies at the end. We are still waiting for Mrs. Nuraini Tahir from Indonesia, who had promised to give an input on the experiences in Indonesia, and we're still waiting for Muhammad Semambo Kazagazi, Principal Climate Change Officer on Adaptation with the Ministry of Water and Environment and of Uganda, who had also once again confirmed this morning that he'll be here. So we are hoping that these two will join us still during the session. I'll double check in a minute if there's any technical problem with them. But yeah, so the background of this session is that we have, as I said in the pitch, we have a lot of targets for 2030, but then what next? So more and more countries are developing long-term strategies on climate change, but a lot of these strategies are looking at 2050 visions are limited to mitigation. But luckily not all of them. So there's a lot of countries which do look at adaptation and links to biodiversity conservation. And Colombia is one of them. So without much further ado, I would say, Carolina, please, you have the floor. Please present your lessons learned from Colombia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay, I hope that everyone can see it. Thank you very much. I would like to talk to you about Colombia's long-term climate strategy, the role of ecosystem-based adaptation to achieve carbon neutrality and climate resilience. I would like to talk about that the process started on December 2019 when the Colombian government approved our roadmap. Then since January 2020, the Ministry of Environment has led the process with the help of the French cooperation. And on the 1st of November of 2021, Colombia's President, Iván Duque, presented the initiative on the global stage during COP26 in Glasgow, UK. In the right side, you can have the two links where you can download the document without any problem. And before I started, I would like to talk about our key takeaways of this Colombia's LTS. The first one is that Colombia's document is based on two main principles. The first one is that natural-based solutions, we needed to achieve carbon neutrality through the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and increase in removals. And also that climate resilience will be achieved by increasing socio-ecosystems health. The second one is that Colombia will not achieve carbon neutrality if it doesn't focus on adaptation measures and strategies at the same time. The third one is that mitigation and adaptation goals have been blended within our 9 targets. We are not considering them in isolation. And the fourth one is that we developed this study where we measure how much will be the costs of no action in adaptation. And what we found is if nothing is done, losses and damages related to climate change in our country can be compared to having a pandemic as COVID-19 and its detrimental economics effects year after year. So with that in mind, we developed this vision on how we see our country in the future. And we found and we established that in 2050, Colombia will be a climate resilient country that prioritizes human welfare, biodiversity conservation, and water security. And what we would like to achieve is that regions, sectors, and institutions with sufficient adaptation capabilities to endure climate change. For this, for fulfill our vision and build a pathway for climate resilience, we have set two major national goals. The first one is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Colombia to 90% compared to 2015 and balance the remaining 10% with carbon removal to achieve a net zero balance. And the second one is to reduce Colombia's vulnerability to climate change by decreasing the current classification from high to low or very low vulnerability. So we have a quantitative adaptation goal. For this, we choose or we developed 9 targets. So we will achieve those big objectives. The first one is knowledge and climate governance. The second one is biodiversity and ecosystem services, sustainable management. The third one is related to sustainable production and consumption. The fourth is related to fair transition of labor force. The fifth one, sustainable rural development. The sixth one, related to cities with integrated urban development. The seventh, related to diversified our energy matrix. Eighth one, sustainable mobility and infrastructure. And ninth, related to human health systems. As you can see, these targets are in a specific order because we are talking about a climate strategy. The first one is related to knowledge and climate governance. But the second one of our targets of most important is biodiversity and ecosystem services, sustainable management. So this target is composed like for 4 optional or transformation options. The first one is related to socio-ecological transition to multifunctional landscapes. So what we would like to achieve to 2050 is that we have a lot of multifunctional landscapes where conservation and production areas are in the same area in a harmonized way. The second one is related to sustainable management of marine and oceanic ecosystems. The third one with future water security. And the fourth one, we are talking about national ex situ conservation systems. If we achieve target number 2, we are going to achieve the other targets related with number 3, that we would like that at 2050, we are talking about that our bioeconomy is at least 20% of our GDP. In number 4, when we are talking about fair transition of labor force, we are talking and we would like to achieve that at least 40% of the employment will be green and based on biodiversity. The fifth one actually is talking about sustainable rural development, that this is like a sister of this target 2 of biodiversity and ecosystem services, sustainable management. We understand that we cannot achieve sustainable rural management if we don't achieve biodiversity and ecosystem services management as well. So here we're talking about landscape management for enhanced biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, fisheries, forest management, soil, water, and biodiversity good practices. Number 6, that is related to cities, we are talking about 2 things: how we take or how we manage land use planning with an ecosystem approach. That it could be EbA or it could be also ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And the other one is how we can use natural-based solutions to enhance biodiversity, or for how we can manage these green areas in the cities for removing greenhouse gas emissions, and also how we can better, I don't know how to say that, like our adaptation to heat waves and risk reduction. Number 7 is where we are talking about energy, and we decided that we are going to use natural-based solutions for power generation and for safety transmission. Number 8, we are talking about sustainable mobility. So we're talking about smart rivers, smart roads, and how we can use also natural-based solutions for resilient infrastructure. And number 9 is related to human health. So how biodiversity can help us to increase adaptation capacity on a human population and human health systems. It is important that Colombia's LTS is aligned to, of course, to our NDC, and also it's aligned with the post-2020 biodiversity framework of CBD, and it's related with IPCC, the last report, and EBA. And in the at the national scale, we are aligned to national climate change policy and law, national adaptation plan, sectoral and territorial climate change plans, biodiversity national policy, our disaster risk plan, and others. So we are really aligned to our national policy. And just for finish, I would like to give you some lessons learned from Colombia related to integrating adaptation and biodiversity conservation. The first one is that Colombia, as a mega diversity country, cannot talk about climate change mitigation without talking about adaptation strategy for all targets. The second one is that we needed to achieve a quantitative national adaptation goal. And this is really important because we need a clear north. So all projects and all actions will go towards that pathway. The third one is that we need to accelerate the development of the national adaptation information system. We now have like this huge mitigation information system for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but now we're talking and the necessity and that we need to accelerate this development of this system. Because we need to understand if we are or not in a climate resilient pathway. And the fourth one is that we cannot, as a country, separate disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. We need to talk about both of them in a related way and develop win-win actions. That's all. Thank you very much.
Then I would now ask Mrs. Nouraini Tahir. He's Head of Subdirectorate for Climate Change Adaptation Tool Development in the Ministry of Environmental and Forestry of Indonesia. Mrs. Nouraini Tahir, can you hear us?
Hello, hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Could you now? We're glad that you can make it. We know that it's very late in Indonesia. It's almost 11 in the evening. Could you?
Yep.
Do you have a presentation, or do you just want to present the experience from Indonesia without presentation?
Yes, actually I have my presentation, but I prefer to just talk. To share my experience here, because I have only maybe 10 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, please start then. Thank you.
Should I turn on my camera on, or I'm not sure.
It would be nice, yes, if you can, because the session will be recorded also.
Yes, but I'm
if your
afraid
internet allows, that would be nice.
Yeah. Yes, but I'm afraid that okay, I will turn on my camera on first, and then maybe I'll turn it off to ensure that my connection will still in a good connection, to ensure that I'm still in a good connection. Is that okay?
Yes. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see my picture? No.
No, unfortunately, I cannot see a picture.
Okay. I think it's better if I proceed it now without cam on. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening. Is that evening? I'm not sure with other part of this globe. Hello, I'm Nurani Tahir from Indonesia. I'd like to share my experience in as a part of the LTS team for Indonesian LTS document. I just want to briefly talk about our experience. It took about almost 2 years to formulate and to provide a final draft for LTS document. And then as you can see maybe from the UNFCCC repository, our LTS document we had submitted our LTS. So it's quite a long process because we started in 2019 before the pandemic, and we experienced also some difficulties to make some progress, but we still went on. And then we had various meetings related to mitigation aspect as well as adaptation aspect. And then as we know that the mandate for LTS is not really required to incorporate or to include adaptation aspect in this document, but from Indonesian point of view that we should put also adaptation elements in this case. Some of them is related to biodiversity and conservation. Because we also have submitted in the same time, we have also the draft of the updated NDC, and then in our updated NDC, we've already put, I think, almost measure related to biodiversity and conservation as the key programs that we call enhanced program for adaptation, because we see that the potential synergy with climate change and biodiversity as well. From our experience, it's not an easy one because we have to proceed so many meetings with different various stakeholders, from the government officers, from the ministries, as well as for the public, from the public, because we had also a public consultation after the draft is available. And then as a document finally available, the draft, but we still have some maybe more political process. And then in 2021, we have our LTS LCCR 2050 document approved by the president. And then in July, in 2021, we submitted this LTS document. What we've learned from this process, that it's very important to have to involve, I mean, an expert which can guide us in developing our LTS document, particularly for adaptation process, for adaptation element, because as we know that a bit different from mitigation aspect. Mitigation can be measured, but what about the adaptation? What the metric? What the indicator that we should have? Fortunately, that we've already put our some of these elements in our updated NDC, so it's quite easy just to only extend the element of NDC's adaptation, and then also we enrich it with some recent policy related to our development and environment. And then the second important thing in developing is LTS is to ensure that we have initial meeting with strategic stakeholder and to make the scope of the element itself, that we know what we will put in this document, because we know we can put everything in this document, but we have to ensure that this is element that we need, because if we talk about LTS, it's more long-term, long vision. So we have to fit with that nature of the document. The third one, for sure, we need more effort in terms of time, money, and then energy to carry out this process back and forth, and sometimes we have to set up a parallel meeting from adaptation and mitigation, and then we have to compromise, or we will come with the result to see is there any possible to synergize between mitigation and adaptation, because we found that some of the measures of the programs I think can be co-benefit from adaptation and mitigation. It depends which one will be the benefit from the main measures. I think maybe some information that Indonesia have many ministries related to these LTS elements. So we really have to identify which one the most related issue with the adaptation element that we will put in the LTS document. In our case, we have six priority field that as a starting point to identify which ministry that we will involve in this process permanently, and then for enrich the process, we also identify which one is more related to the governance, etc. I think that's all from my presentation. I hope give you a new or a very brief information about the process. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Uli, for inviting to provide also a small input on this topic. Considering that I think are a bit behind of time, I will maybe skip some parts and go to the main part. So my name is Rosa Kirgizbekova. I work for the GIZ support project for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And today I will be sharing some key insight and messages on the topic of long-term strategies for net zero, climate resilient, and nature positive future by 2050. This is basically aggregated message based on the experience and knowledge of GIZ projects that support countries globally on long-term strategies. And this is what we have accumulated also through the GIZ community of practice on long-term strategies. This is some background information I wanted to share on GIZ projects, but I think I will skip that, also bearing in mind the time. So there is a strong evidence about the interconnectedness of climate change, biodiversity loss, degradation of ecosystems, and pollution that have been laid out in different reports. And I think in many sessions also today, these interlinkages have been strongly emphasized, so I will not stop on that. Importantly, the global agendas and existing frameworks, they also all lay out clear long-term goals. And these are also those that in the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement, in the biodiversity framework, in the Sendai framework. And it is very crucial to also mention here that last year, the COP26, the Glasgow Climate Pact, reiterated the invitation to countries to prepare their long-term strategies for low greenhouse gas emission with a transition to net zero emissions by mid-century, and also to align these long-term strategies with the countries' NDCs. There are also some challenges on coherently planning and implementing various strategies for those that are mostly the Rio Conventions and the short, medium-term plans versus long-term plans, and lack of alignment of policies and implementation. I will also have to skip this part in order to go to the main part of my presentation. Mostly is that the experience shows that the development of national determined contributions, the development of national adaptation plans, of biodiversity strategies, and so on, it's critical in order to address various measures, various challenges. But unfortunately, this has been done until now very in a silo approach. And one way to address those is to link mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity conservation and restoration, and sustainable development in such an integrated manner in long-term strategies. And these could also send the clear narrative that multi-level governance, multi-level policy development can ensure coherent planning and implementation of both climate plans, biodiversity plans, and also sustainable development. And some key messages about the way forward is that mid-century or long-term visions and development strategies should be seen as a foundation for transformation to sustainable economies, healthy ecosystems, and also promoting human prosperity. And they can also serve as an operational framework for realizing these interconnections between social, economic, and environmental issues. Importantly, that the national plans, short or medium-term plans for climate change, biodiversity, sustainable development, they should be aligned with long-term strategies, and they should also mutually reinforce each other's implementation. This also will help to promote synergies and to mitigate any trade-offs that may arise. Integrated modeling and accounting for long-term planning is also available, and there are different tools that exist that account for ecosystem services, that account for the impact of climate change on economy, also on macroeconomic level. And these integrated tools and models should be used further for such long-term planning. Aligned and coherent planning and processes, they also help in terms of identifying the needs that countries have in order to plan and implement these plans, and this can be also addressed through systemic capacity development. One of the main issues that still remains is the tracking of implementation and reporting on climate strategies, and also the relevant biodiversity protection strategies. And this could be also one way to address that once there is a more coherent and more aligned planning and implementation is in place. And of course, close coordination, vertical and horizontal cooperation needs to be ensured based on whole of a government, whole of a society approach. And this is also one way that can make better use of the national resources and to set up more efficient processes. There are also a few entry points that have been identified, and also I will go maybe briefly through those entry points that could be made use in order to start this more integrated planning and to force the transformational change. One way is, of course, to enable whole of government approaches and to promote capacity development for integrated planning and implementation, piloting integrated approaches in key driver sectors, namely the energy, agriculture, and industry sectors, scaling existing good practices or functioning solutions that can address both climate mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity. And here, of course, the role of nature-based solutions is extremely important because they can address multiple issues and provide multiple benefits as well. And important, again, I mean, this was already mentioned in various sessions here, that NDCs and also in this regard, long-term strategies should also actively include nature-based solutions, both for mitigation and adaptation. And the integrated macroeconomic analysis, I also mentioned it, that there are already tools available that can be used to integrate nature resources, biodiversity into long-term climate planning. Also, it is also a repetition here about available financing mechanisms to attract private and public finance. And one example is the debt swaps for climate and nature that are starting to get more attention and being used by some countries proactively. And here, lastly, of course, one has to mention the role of digital tools that can help to collect and to make available more reliable data and information sources, also for better planning, for better tracking and reporting on plans in order also to contribute to holistic decision makings in the country level. So these are some of the insights that we wanted to share. And as I mentioned, these are just aggregated entry points and aggregated key insights based on the overall experience of work on the LTS. So,
okay, thank you, Rosa. Thank you. We now have a dilemma, dear speakers and participants, because the closing remarks will start in 5 minutes or 4 minutes. If there's some urgent questions, we can ask now, but as it was so complicated to have our speaker from Uganda, and I think he's now back again, so I would propose to at least have some, Mr. Samambo, if you're here. So we'll try once again, but we only have really 3 or 4 minutes. So if you can give us some highlights from Uganda, because we don't have the full 10 minutes anymore, but we still want to hear at least some information from Uganda. Are you still there? Can you hear us now? Mehdi, Mr. Samambo, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. I've joined using a phone now. Okay. Can you hear me?
We have very little time left, but we would try to at least briefly show your presentation. Sylvia, if you could try once more, but we would really have to start in 3 to. Do you want to start sharing the presentation, or do you want to say something without presentation? Because we only have 3 or 4 minutes left in the session.
I can say something without a presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and apologies for the network challenges. But what I want to say that as the rest of the countries have shared, we began the process of preparing the long-term strategy for the country 2 years back in 2019. And this has been done parallel with the update of the Uganda's NDC. And then what we did is actually to have a whole of government approach where we have the sectors, we have the political, we have the local government, and the civil society plus the private sector participating in this process. And we took analyses in terms of climate risk analysis and vulnerabilities that help us to identify what are the most affected sectors, and those that are projected to be affected by climate change, and those that are at risk, and came out that sectors which are really biodiversity-related sectors we are more at risk. For example, look at the water resources, you look at ecosystems, you look at forestry, and you look at sectors like fisheries and agriculture as one of the most affected sectors. And then we also took what we call the assessment of mitigation. And then in this one, we're running about the mitigation models. And then it came out that the sectors that were emitting a lot, and those are prolific emit a lot, is actually the sectors which are belonging to the forestry, full sectors, agriculture, forest, and land use, followed with energy. But when we look at the energy mix for the country, again, it is 80% of it is actually coming from the biodiversity aspect, coming from the biomass. So from there, we're able to develop our long-term strategy vision, which was highly consultative. And then we came up with 11 pillars, those 13 pillars for climate change. But these pillars have both connotation of adaptation and mitigation. And specifically, when we look at pillar number 4 in the presentation, which I've already shared, it is looking about promoting nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions, we're looking at the aspect of promoting climate resilience and adaptation, but also trying to curb the country's emissions using the nature-based solutions coming from forestry, issues to do with wetlands, among others. So in that regard, Uganda has already done this, and then as I summarize, is that we have the advanced copy or draft of the LTS, which has already been contributed to by the stakeholders. And now it is right now undergoing internal review by the Climate Change Department, which is the institution responsible for coordinating all climate change actions. And once we do this, we'll be able to take it to the wider stakeholders validation to look at those strategic pillars that were proposed to help us meet adaptation and mitigation, and of which they have a lot of biodiversity conservation and ecosystem services, which are part of long-term strategy that the country have. So we are using the NDC, will help us to implement the LTS pillars, and then also looking at other sector strategies that will also help us to implement the LTS pillars. So the LTS pillars is actually the long-term strategy for the country, and then the NDC is like the short and medium-term strategy that will help us to achieve the intended adaptation and mitigation options. So in brief, this is where we are, but it's really trying to say that in the LTS, as you summarize, it has a lot of nature-based solutions which are hinged on biodiversity and ecosystem services to help us achieve our long-term resilience options and adaptation, as well as contributing to a reduction of greenhouse gases in various sectors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I do apologize for the technical problems, but it was so interesting, and we'll try to make the presentation available for everyone afterwards. And I think we have to invite you again, because it was so much happening in Uganda and also Indonesia and Colombia. So we'll try to discuss this further at another occasion. But now our session time is up, and I would like to invite all of you to join the closing. I would like to thank all of our speakers, even due to the technical difficulties. I thought you a great job you're doing in Colombia, in Indonesia, and in Uganda. And yeah, so we have to invite you back another time to learn more. Rosa, also for your input from supporting the Paris Agreement. With that, our time, unfortunately, is already up. Thanks a lot once again. Thank you for participating. Look, there will be a presentation, a recording of the event. There will be a documentation of the Knowledge Day. So please do look forward to that. And now I would ask you to go back to the platform and join the closing remarks in the live stream once again. Thank you.